The Krillian patrol ship Void Stalker drifted silently through the asteroid field, its dark hull nearly invisible against the cosmic backdrop. Commander Zexthul clicked his mandibles in satisfaction as he reviewed the intelligence reports on his holographic display. The humans had established another mining operation in this sector, and High Command wanted prisoners for interrogation. "Contact on sensors," reported his communications officer, a young Krillian whose chitin still bore the pale green of inexperience. "Single human transport vessel. Minimal escort." Zexthul's 4 eyes focused on the tactical display. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as a stubborn species, but their military technology remained primitive compared to the Krillian Empire's advanced weaponry. This would be simple. "Disable their engines," he ordered. "We need live specimens." The transport ship Helena's Pride was carrying a routine supply run to the mining station when the attack came. Captain Maria Santos barely had time to send a distress signal before the alien weapons tore through their shield generators and crippled the engines. In the cargo hold, Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison was checking inventory when the ship lurched violently. Emergency lighting bathed everything in red as the artificial gravity fluctuated. Jake grabbed his sidearm from his duffel bag and moved toward the bridge, his movements fluid and controlled despite the chaos. Jake had spent 15 years in the Navy SEALs before transitioning to this security detail. At 35, he was older than most active operators, but his skills remained sharp. The other crew members called him Chief, but his old teammates had known him by another name entirely. "Captain, what's our status?" Jake asked as he entered the bridge. Captain Santos looked up from her damaged console, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. "Unknown hostiles. They disabled our engines and shields. We're dead in the water." Through the viewport, Jake could see the alien ship approaching. It was sleek and predatory, covered in what looked like organic armor plating. He'd heard stories about alien raids, but never encountered them personally. "How many crew aboard?" he asked. 12, including you." Jake nodded grimly. He'd been in worse situations, but never in space with civilians to protect. The ship shuddered again as something large attached to their hull. "They're boarding," Santos whispered. The sound of cutting tools echoed through the corridors. Jake moved the crew to the engine room, the most defensible position on the ship. He checked his pistol. 15 rounds plus 1 in the chamber. Not much against an unknown number of alien hostiles with advanced technology. The first Krillian through the breach was 7 feet tall, covered in dark chitinous armor that seemed to absorb light. Its 4 eyes scanned the corridor while its mandibles clicked in what Jake assumed was communication. The creature carried a weapon that hummed with energy. Jake waited until 3 of them had entered before opening fire. His first shot took the lead alien's center mass, the impact staggering it, but not dropping it. The armor was tougher than he'd expected. The aliens returned fire with energy weapons that carved molten furrows in the bulkheads. Jake rolled behind a support strut as superheated metal sparked around him. He'd need to be smarter about this. Using hand signals, he directed Captain Santos and 2 other crew members to a maintenance shaft while he laid down covering fire. The aliens advanced methodically, their movements coordinated and professional. These weren't pirates or raiders. This was a military operation. Jake's training kicked in. He used the ship's layout to his advantage, firing from cover and constantly moving. The aliens had superior firepower, but they were fighting on his ground now. He managed to wound 2 more before his ammunition ran low. That's when the gas canisters came through the vents. Jake recognized the sweet smell immediately, a paralytic agent. He held his breath and grabbed an emergency respirator, but it was too late. The gas was already in his bloodstream. His vision blurred and his legs gave out beneath him. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness took him was a massive Krillian looming over him, its mandibles clicking in what might have been laughter. Commander Zexthul inspected the captured humans in the detention bay of his ship. 12 specimens, including one that had shown remarkable resistance during the boarding action. The security recordings showed this human had eliminated 3 of his warriors and wounded 2 others before succumbing to the paralytic gas. "This one fought well," observed Sub-Commander Irelka, indicating the unconscious human male. The others surrendered quickly. Zexthul studied the human's personnel file, translated from their ship's computer. Jake Morrison, age 35. Listed as security consultant, but our intelligence suggests military background. Should we separate him from the others? No. Let him wake up with his companions. I want to observe their group dynamics. Jake awoke slowly, his head pounding from the after effects of the alien gas. He was lying on a hard surface in what appeared to be a holding cell. The walls were made of some smooth, dark material that felt organic to the touch. Bioluminescent strips provided dim lighting. Captain Santos was awake, sitting against the far wall with the rest of the crew. She looked relieved when she saw Jake stirring. "How long was I out?" he asked, sitting up carefully. "About 6 hours. They've been asking questions through some kind of translation device." Santos gestured toward a small crystalline device mounted on one wall. "Mostly about our military capabilities and colony locations." Jake examined their prison. The cell was roughly 20 feet square with no visible door seam. The only features were the translator device and what might have been a waste disposal unit in one corner. "Anyone hurt?" "Engineer Morrison has a broken wrist from the boarding," Santos reported. "The rest are just scared." Jake nodded and moved to the wall where the translator was mounted. He'd been trained in resistance and escape techniques, but this situation was unlike anything in the manual. He was dealing with an alien species with unknown capabilities and motivations. "I need everyone to stay calm," he told the crew. "Don't volunteer any information beyond name, rank, and basic personal details. If they ask about military installations or colony defenses, say you don't know." Young apprentice navigator Chen looked up at him with frightened eyes. "What do they want with us?" Before Jake could answer, a section of the wall dissolved into a doorway. 3 Krillians entered, led by the largest one Jake had seen yet. This one's chitin was darker and more elaborate, clearly indicating rank. The alien spoke in a series of clicks and hisses. The translator device hummed briefly, then produced heavily accented English. "I am Commander Zexthul of the Krillian Imperial Navy. You are prisoners of war." "We're civilian contractors," Captain Santos said quickly. "This is a cargo vessel, not a military ship." Zexthul's 4 eyes focused on her with unsettling intensity. "Your companion fought my warriors with considerable skill for a civilian contractor." The alien's gaze shifted to Jake. "What is your military designation, human?" Jake remained silent, meeting the alien's stare without flinching. He'd been interrogated before by professionals, and the basic principles remained the same regardless of species. "Your silence is noted," Zexthul continued. "No matter. Our intelligence files are quite comprehensive. Jake Morrison, former United States Navy, special operations background. Your people call you SEALs?" The alien pronounced the word carefully, as if testing its meaning. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. If they had access to that level of intelligence, the situation was worse than he'd thought. "What do you want?" Santos asked. "Information about your military capabilities, colony defensive systems, fleet deployment schedules." Zexthul clicked his mandibles. "Your species has proven more resilient than expected during our initial incursions. My superiors wish to understand why." Jake processed this information carefully. The aliens were conducting some kind of systematic campaign against human colonies. This wasn't a random raid. It was reconnaissance for a larger invasion. "We're not military personnel," Santos repeated. "We don't have access to that kind of information." "Perhaps." But he does. Zexthul pointed at Jake. Former Special Operations. Current security detail for strategic mining operations. You have seen our defensive capabilities, human. You understand the futility of resistance. Jake finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. I understand you made a mistake. The alien's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Elaborate. You kidnapped the wrong human. Zexthul leaned forward, interested despite himself. And what makes you special among your kind? Jake looked directly into the alien's 4 eyes, his expression cold and calculating. For the first time since awakening, he smiled, a thin, predatory expression that made several crew members shift uncomfortably. You'll find out soon enough. The interrogation continued for another hour, with Zexthul asking increasingly specific questions about human military doctrine and technology. Jake answered only with name, rank, and service number, information they likely already possessed. When the aliens finally left, the crew gathered around Jake in the dim bioluminescent light. Chief, Santos whispered, what did you mean back there? About them kidnapping the wrong human? Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying the walls of their prison. He was looking for weaknesses, access points, anything that might give them an advantage. His mind was already working on escape plans, but he needed more information about the ship's layout and crew complement. Captain, what did you know about my service record before this mission? Just that you had military experience and came highly recommended for security work. Why? Jake smiled again, that same cold expression. Because before I became a security consultant, I spent 15 years hunting the worst things humanity had to offer. My old unit had a saying, the only easy day was yesterday. Chen looked confused. I don't understand. You will, Jake said quietly, settling back against the wall. They think they caught a cargo ship security guard, but they've never dealt with a Navy SEAL before, and they definitely don't know why my teammates called me Reaper. In the ship's command center, Commander Zexthul reviewed the interrogation recordings. The human's defiance was expected. His species was known for stubbornness. But there had been something in the prisoner's eyes during those final moments, a cold confidence that troubled him. Sir, his intelligence officer reported, I've been analyzing the human's service records from their ship's database. This Jake Morrison has an unusual background. How so? Multiple classified operations across several war zones, specialized training in unconventional warfare, and, sir, there's a reference here to a nickname his unit used. Something called Reaper. Zexthul's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. What does this term signify in human culture? Still analyzing, sir, but preliminary translation suggests it refers to death itself, a being that harvests lives. The commander felt an unfamiliar sensation, something his species rarely experienced. It took him a moment to recognize it as unease. Double the guard on the detention level, he ordered, and increase monitoring of the prisoners. As his subordinates hurried to comply, Zexthul couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a serious error in judgment. The human's confidence hadn't been bravado or ignorance. It had been the quiet certainty of someone who'd been in impossible situations before and survived. In the detention cell, Jake continued his visual inspection of their prison while the crew tried to rest. He'd already identified several potential weaknesses in the cell's construction and was beginning to form a plan. The Krillians had superior technology and numbers, but they'd made a critical mistake. They'd given him time to think, to plan, and to prepare. More importantly, they'd underestimated what a highly trained human could accomplish when properly motivated. Jake thought about his old teammates, scattered across the galaxy on various assignments. They'd always said he was the most dangerous member of their unit, not because he was the strongest or fastest, but because he never stopped fighting, never gave up, never left anyone behind. The aliens were about to learn why his enemies had learned to fear the name Reaper. He closed his eyes and began to plan. 3 days passed before Jake made his first move. He'd spent those 72 hours carefully observing the Krillian guard rotations, studying the bioluminescent lighting patterns, and testing the structural integrity of various surfaces. More importantly, he'd been watching his captors' behavior through the translator device, learning their rhythms and reactions. The aliens brought nutrition paste twice daily, delivered through a small port that opened in the wall. Jake noticed that the guard always stood in the same position during feeding, exactly 4 feet from the wall, mandibles clicking in what seemed to be a status report to someone outside. Captain Santos had grown increasingly worried about their situation. The aliens had separated Engineer Morrison for individual questioning the previous day, and he'd returned with burn marks on his arms, evidence that their interrogation methods were escalating. "Chief," Santos whispered during the sleep cycle when the lighting dimmed, "we need to do something. They're going to start torturing us for information we don't have." Jake nodded slowly. He'd reached the same conclusion. The Krillians were becoming frustrated with their lack of progress, and frustrated interrogators tended to become creative in their methods. "Tonight," he said quietly, "when the next shift change occurs." "What's the plan?" Jake had been working on that for 3 days. "I need you to gather everyone against the far wall when I give the signal. No matter what happens, stay down and stay quiet. Jake, these things are 7 feet tall with natural armor plating. You're unarmed." Jake's expression remained calm. "Captain, trust me when I say this isn't my first time being held prisoner." During his 3rd deployment in Afghanistan, Jake's SEAL team had been captured by insurgents after a mission went wrong. He'd spent 4 days in a cave complex, zip-tied to a support beam, while his captors decided whether to execute them or trade them for prisoners. On the 4th night, he dislocated his thumb, slipped the restraints, and systematically eliminated 6 guards with nothing but a piece of broken concrete and absolute determination. His teammates had found him the next morning, calmly waiting beside the bodies of their captors. That was the first time they'd called him Reaper. The feeding time arrived exactly on schedule. Jake positioned himself near the food port, apparently focused on the nutrition paste. The other crew members had subtly moved toward the opposite wall, following his earlier instructions. The familiar clicking of mandibles echoed through the translator as the Krillian guard made his status report. Jake counted silently. 1, 2, 3. On 4, he moved. The nutrition port was designed to prevent exactly what Jake was attempting, but the Krillians had underestimated human flexibility and determination. Jake dislocated his shoulder with practiced ease, compressed his rib cage, and squeezed through the 8-inch opening with fluid grace. The guard was still in the middle of his report when Jake materialized in the corridor behind him. The alien's 4 eyes went wide with surprise, mandibles clicking in alarm. Jake's hand shot out, fingers finding the nerve cluster he'd observed at the base of the creature's neck during the interrogations. The Krillian collapsed, paralyzed but conscious. Jake quickly relieved him of his weapon and communication device, then dragged the alien into the cell through the now enlarged food port. "How the hell did you do that?" Chen gasped. "Yoga," Jake replied dryly, popping his shoulder back into place with a grimace. "Captain, I need you to bind this one with whatever you can find. Use strips from our clothing." The Krillian weapon was unlike anything Jake had encountered. A crystalline device that hummed with contained energy. He experimented briefly, discovering the trigger mechanism and power settings. It would have to do. Jake studied the corridor through the cell's opening. The ship's design was organic in nature, with curved walls that seemed to pulse with their own life. Bioluminescent strips provided navigation lighting, but there were long stretches of shadow between them, perfect for what he had in mind. "I'm going to scout the ship," he told Santos. "If I'm not back in 2 hours, Assume I've been captured or killed. Jake, this is suicide. There are dozens of them on this ship. Jake checked the alien weapon one more time, his movements efficient and practiced. Captain, do you know what the difference is between a terrorist and a Navy SEAL? Santos shook her head. Terrorists fight for a cause they believe in. SEALs fight for the man next to them. Jake looked at each crew member in turn. I'm not leaving anyone behind. That's a promise. He slipped through the opening and disappeared into the corridor shadows. The ship's layout was more complex than Jake had anticipated. The organic architecture seemed to follow principles of growth rather than engineering, with passages that branched and merged like blood vessels. He moved carefully, using shadows and alcoves to avoid the occasional patrol. Jake's first priority was intelligence gathering. He needed to understand the ship's crew complement, defensive systems, and most importantly, the location of the communication array. If he could get a message to human forces, they might be able to mount a rescue operation. Moving through the ship's ventilation system, a network of organic tubes that reminded him uncomfortably of intestines, Jake began mapping the vessel's key systems. The bridge was located at the ship's forward end, protected by multiple checkpoints and energy barriers. The engine room sat at the stern, humming with alien technology beyond his understanding. It was in the ship's intelligence center that Jake found what he was looking for. The chamber contained dozens of holographic displays showing star charts, human colony locations, and what appeared to be invasion timelines. Jake's blood ran cold as he studied the data. The Krillians weren't planning random raids. They were preparing for a systematic conquest of human space. More disturbing were the casualty estimates. The aliens expected minimal resistance from human forces, projecting a complete occupation within 18 months. They'd based these calculations on their encounters with human vessels like the Helena's Pride. Jake began memorizing the invasion plans when he heard footsteps in the corridor. 2 Krillian technicians were approaching, their mandibles clicking in conversation. He had perhaps 30 seconds before they entered the intelligence center. Instead of hiding, Jake made a different choice. The first technician died before it knew Jake was there, the stolen energy weapon burning through its chitin at close range. The second managed half a scream before Jake's knife, improvised from a piece of the ship's metal framework, found the gap in its armor plating. Jake dragged the bodies into a storage alcove and returned to the intelligence displays. He had minutes before someone discovered the bodies, but the information he was gathering was critical. Using the dead technician's access codes, he began downloading the invasion plans to the alien communication device he'd taken from the guard. That's when the alarms started. The ship's lighting shifted from dim blue to angry red, and a wailing sound echoed through the corridors. Jake could hear running footsteps and shouted commands in the alien language. Someone had discovered either the missing guard or the bodies in the storage alcove. Time to go. Jake moved through the ship like a ghost, using his knowledge of the ventilation system to avoid the search teams. But as he approached the detention level, he encountered a problem. The corridors leading to the holding cells were flooded with Krillian security forces, at least 20 aliens in full combat armor. They were expecting him. Commander Zexthul stood in the detention corridor, his weapon drawn and his mandibles clicking with agitation. The human had proven far more dangerous than anticipated. 2 of his crew were dead, and the intelligence center had been compromised. Jake Morrison, Zexthul called out, his voice echoing through the translator system. I know you can hear me. Your escape attempt has failed. Surrender now and your companions will not be harmed. Silence answered him. You cannot fight us all, human. You have seen our numbers and our technology. This is futile. From somewhere in the shadows came a voice, calm and steady. Commander, you've made 2 mistakes. Zexthul's eyes scanned the dimly lit corridor, trying to locate the source of the voice. What mistakes? First, you assumed I was trying to escape. The alien commander felt that familiar unease returning. Then what is your objective? To show you why humans don't surrender. Jake had spent his time in the intelligence center doing more than just gathering information. He'd also learned about the ship's environmental systems, including the atmospheric processors that maintained life support throughout the vessel. The Krillians breathed a nitrogen-oxygen mixture similar to humans, but their system included trace amounts of a compound that was highly flammable when exposed to the right catalyst. Jake had found that catalyst in the ship's maintenance supplies. From his position in the ventilation system directly above the detention level, Jake activated the improvised incendiary device he'd constructed from alien cleaning compounds and a power cell from the stolen weapon. The explosion wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. The chain reaction that followed as the ship's atmosphere ignited in a controlled burn created chaos throughout the detention level. Emergency containment fields activated, dividing the corridor into isolated sections. Jake dropped through a ceiling panel into the middle of the confused Krillian security team. In the chaos of flashing lights and emergency alarms, he moved like death itself. The first alien died from a knife thrust through its eye socket. The second fell to its stolen weapon, the energy beam cutting through armor like paper. Jake rolled behind a support strut as return fire melted the walls around him, then came up firing at a third Krillian who was trying to coordinate his squad's response. But Jake wasn't just killing. He was moving with purpose toward the detention cells. Every step took him closer to his objective, every fallen alien clearing his path. Commander Zexthul watched in horror as the human carved through his security forces with ruthless efficiency. The creature moved like nothing he'd ever encountered, fluid, deadly, and utterly without fear. In less than 2 minutes, Jake had eliminated 8 trained warriors and was still advancing. "Fall back," Zexthul ordered. "Seal the detention level." But it was too late. Jake had reached the cell holding his crew. The blast that had started the chaos had also damaged the cell's containment field. Jake was able to force the opening wide enough for the crew to escape. Captain Santos looked at him in amazement as he gestured for them to follow. "The ship's shuttle bay is 2 levels up," he told them quietly. "Stay close and do exactly what I say." "Jake," Santos whispered, staring at the bodies scattered throughout the corridor. "What did you do?" Jake's expression was calm, almost serene. "What I was trained to do, Captain. What I've always done." He handed her a backup weapon he'd taken from one of the fallen guards. "Now let's go home." As they moved through the ship toward the shuttle bay, the crew began to understand why Jake's old unit had called him Reaper. He didn't just fight, he waged war with surgical precision. Every movement was calculated, every action designed to maximize damage while minimizing risk to his charges. The Krillians were learning what human special forces were capable of when properly motivated. They were discovering that capturing a Navy SEAL wasn't like capturing an ordinary human. They were beginning to understand that they'd grabbed hold of something far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. Behind them, in the damaged intelligence center, the downloaded invasion plans sat in Jake's captured communication device. Information that would change the balance of power between humanity and the Krillian Empire. But first, they had to survive long enough to deliver it. Jake checked his weapon's power level and smiled that cold, predatory smile. The Krillians thought they were hunting him. They were about to learn who was really being hunted. "Move out," he whispered to his crew. "Time to show these aliens what happens when they mess with the wrong species." The shuttle bay of the Void Stalker was a cathedral of alien engineering, a vast chamber with organic walls that pulsed like living tissue. Dozens of small craft hung from the ceiling in what looked like cocoons, while larger vessels rested on the deck like sleeping predators. Jake led his crew through the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the bay floor. Through the transparent sections, they could see Krillian security forces setting up defensive positions around every shuttle. Commander Zexthul had anticipated their destination and prepared accordingly. 37 hostiles visible, Jake whispered into the improvised communication device he'd rigged from alien components. "Multiple heavy weapons emplacements. They're not taking any chances." Captain Santos crouched beside him, studying the tactical situation. "Chief, that's a lot of firepower. Maybe we should find another way." Jake was quiet for a moment, his mind working through possibilities. Then he smiled. Not the cold, predatory expression his crew had grown used to, but something warmer and infinitely more dangerous. "Captain, do you know what the most important lesson they teach in SEAL training is?" Santos shook her head. "That there's always another way. You just have to be willing to take it." Jake had been studying the shuttle bay's design for the past hour, and he'd noticed something the Krillians had overlooked. The organic walls weren't just decorative, they were part of the ship's life support system. More importantly, they were connected to the artificial gravity generators that kept everything anchored to the deck. If he could disrupt those generators at precisely the right moment— "I need everyone to grab onto something solid," Jake instructed. "And I mean really grab on. Your life depends on it." Using components cannibalized from 3 alien devices, Jake had constructed what his old demolitions instructor would have called an elegant solution to a complex problem. The improvised electromagnetic pulse device wouldn't destroy the ship, but it would temporarily overload the localized gravity systems. Jake waited until the Krillian guards had settled into their defensive positions, then activated his device. The effect was instantaneous. Throughout the shuttle bay, artificial gravity flickered and died. 37 heavily armed aliens suddenly found themselves floating helplessly in zero gravity, their organic armor, designed for ground combat, now working against them. But Jake and his crew were prepared. Using handholds and guide wires, Jake moved through the bay like he was born to it. Zero-G combat had been part of his advanced training, though he'd never expected to use it aboard an alien warship. He moved from target to target with deadly efficiency, his improvised knife finding the gaps in chitinous armor while the Krillians struggled to orient themselves. The aliens' energy weapons were powerful, but designed for use in normal gravity. In Zero-G, the recoil sent them spinning helplessly off course. Jake used this to his advantage, staying mobile and striking from unexpected angles. Within minutes, the shuttle bay was clear. Jake reactivated the gravity generators and helped his crew toward the nearest intact shuttle. As the Krillian bodies settled to the deck, Captain Santos stared at him with something approaching awe. "Jake, that was impossible. No one moves like that in zero gravity without specialized training." "I had a good instructor," Jake replied, examining the shuttle's control systems. The alien interface was complex, but the basic principles seemed universal. Admiral Chen at SEAL Team 6 used to say that adaptability was the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. Engineer Morrison, his broken wrist now splinted with alien medical tape, looked up from where he was helping load their wounded. "Chen? Admiral Lisa Chen?" Jake nodded, surprised. "You know her?" "She's my aunt. Lisa always said she trained the best special operators in the Navy, but she never mentioned—" Morrison gestured at the devastation around them. "This. Your aunt taught me that every mission has 3 phases, Jake said, powering up the shuttle's engines. Planning, execution, and extraction. We're moving into phase 3. The shuttle bay's exit was sealed by a massive organic barrier that responded only to Krillian biometric signatures. Jake studied the problem briefly, then smiled again. "Morrison, how good are you with alien technology?" "I'm an engineer, not a xenobiologist." Jake dragged one of the unconscious Krillian guards to the control panel. "Then you're about to become both." It took Morrison 15 minutes to figure out how to bypass the biometric locks using the alien's own body signatures. The shuttle bay doors began to iris open, revealing the star-scattered void beyond. That's when Commander Zexathul arrived with reinforcements. The Krillian commander led 50 warriors into the shuttle bay, their weapons trained on the small human vessel. Through the shuttle's communication system, his voice echoed with barely controlled rage. "Enough, human! You have proven your species' capacity for violence, but this ends now. Surrender, and I give you my word that your crew will be treated according to the conventions of warfare." Jake activated the external speakers and replied calmly, "Commander, I appreciate the offer, but I have a better proposal." "Which is?" "You let us go, and I don't destroy your ship." Zexthul's mandibles clicked in what Jake had learned was laughter. "You are outnumbered 50-1, aboard my vessel, with a single stolen shuttle. How exactly do you propose to threaten us?" Jake held up the alien communication device containing the downloaded invasion plans. "Because while I was in your intelligence center, I didn't just steal your data. I also uploaded something." The Krillian commander felt a familiar chill. "What did you upload?" "A virus. Something my people call a logic bomb." Jake's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. "It's currently working its way through your computer systems, learning your protocols and mapping your networks. In about 10 minutes, it's going to send a very specific command to your antimatter containment system." Zexthul's 4 eyes went wide. The human was bluffing. He had to be. But antimatter containment failures were one of the few things that could completely destroy a Krillian battlecruiser. "You would kill yourself and your crew to stop us?" Jake's response was immediate and certain. "Commander, I spent 15 years learning how to kill people who threatened innocent lives. I've never failed a mission, and I don't plan to start now." The silence stretched for long seconds. Finally, Zexthul spoke. "What do you want?" "Safe passage out of your ship. No pursuit. And when you report back to your superiors, you tell them exactly what happened here." "And in return?" "I disable the virus before it fries your containment systems." Zexthul looked at his warriors, then back at the shuttle. The human had already demonstrated capabilities far beyond anything in their intelligence files. Could he have actually compromised their computer systems? The commander made a decision he would regret for the rest of his career. "You have safe passage," he said finally. Jake began working on the shuttle's communication array, apparently disabling the virus he'd described. In reality, he was activating a different program entirely, one that would begin broadcasting the stolen invasion plans on all human military frequencies once they were clear of the Krillian ship. "Virus is neutralized," Jake announced. "Pleasure doing business with you, Commander." The shuttle launched from the bay and accelerated away from the alien vessel. Jake waited until they were outside the ship's weapon range before revealing his final surprise. "Jake," Captain Santos said, monitoring their sensors. "They're not following us." "They will," Jake replied grimly. "Once they figure out what I really did to their computer systems." "What do you mean?" Jake activated the main viewer, showing the Krillian ship behind them. As they watched, lights began flickering along the vessel's hull. Then sections of the ship's armor plating began ejecting into space. "I didn't upload a virus to their antimatter systems," Jake explained. "I uploaded one to their environmental controls. Right now, their ship is systematically venting atmosphere from every non-essential compartment." Santos stared at him. "You're suffocating them?" "No, just making their lives very uncomfortable. The life support systems will stabilize in a few hours, but they'll be too busy with damage control to pursue us." Jake began plotting a course for the nearest human outpost. "Besides, I wanted to send a message." "Which is?" Jake looked at each crew member in turn, his expression serious. "That humanity doesn't surrender, that we don't give up on our people, and that sometimes, when you grab what looks like prey, you end up catching a predator instead." The communication array crackled to life as Jake's hidden program began broadcasting the Krillian invasion plans across human space. Within hours, the intelligence would reach Earth Command and change the entire strategic situation. 3 days later, the shuttle Helena's Pride docked at Outpost Meridian. Jake Morrison and his crew were debriefed by intelligence officers who could barely believe their report. The stolen Krillian data was authentic and comprehensive, a complete blueprint for an alien invasion that would have caught humanity completely unprepared. Admiral Lisa Chen arrived personally to debrief her former student. She found Jake in the station's observation lounge, staring out at the stars with the kind of distance she recognized in veteran operators. "Hello, Jake," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "Admiral." Jake didn't look away from the viewport. "I hear the brass is calling it the intelligence coup of the century." "They are. The Krillians have postponed their invasion indefinitely while they reassess our defensive capabilities." Chen studied his profile. "What you did on that ship, the tactical innovation, the improvisation under pressure. I've recommended you for the Navy Cross." Jake finally turned to look at her. "Ma'am, I just did my job." "No, Jake. You did what you've always done. You found a way to win when winning seemed impossible." Chen leaned forward. "I'm putting together a new unit. Deep space reconnaissance and special operations. We need people who can think outside the box when dealing with alien threats." "Are you offering me a job, Admiral?" "I'm offering you a chance to do what you do best on a larger scale." Chen stood to leave. "The Krillians aren't the only hostile species out there, Jake. Humanity needs operators who can adapt to any situation and complete any mission." After she left, Jake remained at the viewport for a long time. Captain Santos found him there an hour later. "Penny for your thoughts, Chief?" Jake smiled. The real smile this time, warm and genuine. "Just thinking about something Admiral Chen used to say, that the job isn't done until everyone comes home." And this time everyone came home. Santos nodded, then asked the question that had been bothering her since their escape. "Jake, why did they call you Reaper?" Jake was quiet for a moment, remembering operations in distant places against enemies who had thought themselves safe from human reach. "Because when I was assigned to a mission, someone was going to die. The only question was whether it would be the bad guys or us. And it was never you." "It was never us," Jake corrected. "That was always the point, bringing everyone home." Santos studied his face in the reflection of the viewport. "The Krillians made a mistake when they captured you." Jake nodded slowly. "They thought they were taking prisoners. Instead, they grabbed hold of something they weren't prepared to handle." "What's that?" Jake's reflection smiled in the starlight, and for just a moment, Santos could see the predator that lurked beneath the calm exterior, the reason alien enemies had learned to fear the name Reaper. A Navy SEAL who doesn't know how to quit. Across human space, defense fleets were repositioning based on the intelligence Jake had provided. Colony worlds were strengthening their defenses. The entire strategic balance of the sector had shifted because one man had refused to accept capture as defeat. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, other hostile species were about to learn what the Krillians had discovered too late: that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their ships. It was their absolute refusal to surrender. Jake Morrison reported for duty with Admiral Chen's new unit the following week, ready to carry the fight to humanity's enemies wherever they might hide. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, but it had never faced anything like a determined human special operator. It had never faced a Reaper. The legend was just beginning.